everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our session today. For those who don't know me, I'm Irini Tsaratsi, and I was the PI of one of the projects that was funded under the Landscape Decisions Program, called the Alert for Decision Making. So Alert for Decision Making organized this event today with some of our friends. And you can see the names underneath, but you will see them in a moment. So for just to say a few things, the Alert for Decision Making, Alert for DM, it was designed to bring artists together in conversation with academics from all kinds of disciplines, and with also practitioners and policymakers, and to debate and articulate the role of arts in landscape research and decision making. So we passed quite a couple of years thinking about that. Alert also had some history in asking similar questions. And, but I would like to say that the Landscape Decisions Program funded a range of projects that they are asking this kind of questions. And we saw a few minutes ago the poetry session, and I'm sure you will see more. Not I'm sure, you will see more after the next session. And there is a lot of materials in the exhibition. If you see that they are, in the conference, there are exhibitions, also some films that they are running that come from these projects, but our colleagues will speak about their work as we go along during the course of the conference. What I would like to say here is that from the very start, we set up some questions, and we went on in a course of our projects to ask, to answer some in more details, as Alert was more, try to ask in particular and articulate how do we understand decision making, how do we believe creative approaches can influence decision-making, and at the end of the day, can artistic practices contribute in policy-making? And this, I'm not going to say what we've done during these 2 years as Alert for DM. I say one thing we find out, that these questions were very easy to put them together, were difficult to answer. And although during our journey we learned a lot about how creative approaches can be used, or to bring a benefit in our understanding of landscapes and understanding how making decisions. And also, there are many different things that you will be exposed during the conference, also how creative perspectives help us noticing things, feeling, knowing, etc. But one of the things, if we could single out from all this learning, is that they offer us avenues for experimentation and support novel ways of knowing and valuing. And this is what we are going to do today. So instead of us coming here and presenting our knowing, what we have learned through these years, we thought instead we will experiment. We'll borrow some arts practices to demonstrate ways of revealing values that influence decisions and shape our landscape. So this art practice that we will use today is not the only one. As I said, you heard the poetry earlier. We heard Roxanne speaking how they used art for their projects. And you will learn more during the conference. Our meeting today will replicate the space where civic and expert engagement happens, a public forum for knowledge sharing and completion. The purpose is to allow us all, including you, to think critically and imaginatively. Not that much about finding solution in what you will hear, that's not the point, but about thinking critically and imaginatively about the methods and processes and how these help us to generate new understandings of situations, their effects, and alternatives. So, we invite you all to participate, to take an active role in this experiment. We invite you to consider how that helps to reconcile abstract, distant perspectives about landscape, ideas about beauty, about ecologies, with grounded realities and lived experience. We invite you to consider how culture, history, social life, often overlooked by abstract data calculations, we saw some earlier. It's not a criticism, but I'm saying what we ask you to do today, how these different elements matter in our decisions. We invite you to consider how these details help us creating knowledge about our places, our situation, and our futures. So finally, if we can, perhaps we can reflect what different kinds of data and models we can allow to shape our landscape futures. So I pass it over to Erika, which she will explain a little bit more what we're going to do.
Thank you, Irini. And thank you all. My name's Erika Hughes. I'm a reader in performance at the University of Portsmouth, and that is theater performance. And so I'm the And Friends part of the Alert and Friends work that we're doing today. And we're going to be doing a piece that is a piece of forum theater. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what forum theater actually is. A show of hands, by the way, first participatory act. Has anybody been to a forum theater performance before? Anybody? Oh, amazing. Great. Excellent. You get the gold star. Forum theater is first came about in the 1960s in Brazil, and it was devised by a theater maker named Augusto Boal. And he was working with his theater company in Sao Paulo, and they went touring into some of the poorest parts of the country where they encountered participants or populations who were facing a number of different oppressions. And so the company was started to stage these plays that were about the participants taking back control. However, and sometimes this was really about physical taking of control, so looking at violence and insurrection. And so then one day, one of the participants, one of the audience members, asked the actors, "Okay, well, are you going to take up the fight with us?" And then the actor said, "Well, my gun's actually fake. I'd probably get in the way. I don't know," backed away. So this really ruined this whole notion, and this was really pivotal to Augusto Boal because he realized how kind of hypocritical his work was at the time. And so he decided at that point to stop making plays with communities that were about giving advice to communities and instead start working with communities to co-create something together. So what he did was develop a form of theater where the actors would present a problem, but then the solution would be literally worked out live. So it's a half-finished play that's written the first half by the actors, and the second half is written by the audience. So Boal further developed this form throughout the 1970s, and he was really influenced by Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So you might have heard this term theater of the oppressed, so forum theater is a kind of that. And it's called forum theater because it involves the audience directly in a forum that takes place right after the short play. So forum theater is now used widely by both artists within a wide range of communities, as well as social scientists and health scientists. So on the screen right now is a QR code with a link to a range of sources, either specifically on forum theater or broadly related to arts-based methods that you might find useful if you'd like a little bit more information from a different field and you maybe have kind of no idea where to start. But the key benefit of this kind of work is a particularly deep engagement with participants through the act of co-creation. Forum theater and other arts-based engagement tools that use drama are useful not only as a tool for science communication, which we heard this morning is incredibly important, but also knowledge generation. So what we found in working on a series of projects in UK coastal communities, as well as an informal settlement in Nairobi, Kenya, is that this kind of work can help researchers generate not just data and not just answers, but also questions, again, through this co-creation act with a community. So one project that I've recently worked on was in Shetland with Shetland Arts, and this basically brought together some marine coastal managers and young people. And when I say young people, I mean so 12 to 17-year-olds. And the young people created a play together with myself and some scientists, myself, another couple of artists, and then some scientists. And the scientists and I came in with a really clear, really organized plan. And then about day 3, the young people said, we want to talk about something different. And so what that led to then was a real rethinking of, in this case, it was ocean literacy. But you can use this in many, many different contexts to really look at the way in which what a participant wants to do is going to ultimately change the very questions that you ask. This is, at the end of every day, we ask the young people to respond anonymously and to the event. And what we started seeing was that the young people in the beginning just said, great, thanks, wonderful, and by the middle, they started generating ideas, and the generation of ideas then folded into the next day's work. Another project that we've worked on the same framework is a forum theater piece that's not so dissimilar from what we're going to share with you today. That was in Portsmouth. At the University of Portsmouth, where we've been using forum theater as a training tool in the Coastal and Marine Management MA program. Now, for this today, what we're going to be working on, I've worked with Irini and Professor Tim Akot on creating a solution. So I basically gave them a kind of a framework, and then they came up with a scenario that Irini really developed into specific characters. So that's what you're going to see that we're going to be working on today. As I said earlier, it's half finished, so we're going to invite you, if you're comfortable with doing so, in whatever capacity that you appreciate, to be involved. Now, raise your hand if you really hate being pulled up on stage. Just curious. Oh, amazing. Okay, that's great. Awesome. Okay, so we've got a chance. That's great. And thank you. You can participate in other ways. Right now, I'd like to ask the actors to take the stage, please. And is this microphone working? Doesn't seem, oh, yes, excellent, it is, great, thank you. So now, we're going to stage a short play. And these lovely humans up here are now going to be characters. They're going to introduce themselves when they start the play. I am going to be a part of the play, but not a character. I'm what this forum calls a joker, or a facilitator. So when I come in, we're in a kind of a weird dream space. I'll explain more as we go along, but right now I think we should start the show.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along to this community consultation event this afternoon. My name's Andrew Newton. I'm from UK Natural Parks Authorities. And working with Nature Anglia, we've been asked to draw this meeting up in order to give you the opportunity for your voice to be heard on proposals that we've been developing for some time in relation to the management of Pridemore National Park. As you'll be aware, recent assessments of the SSSI sites on Pridemore have found that most of the habitats are in unfavourable conditions. And as a result, we've done an extensive piece of work to develop a new management strategy for the park. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So we have a panel of your representatives, community representatives from the park who will be able to lead the discussion. And so I'd like to introduce, or ask them to introduce themselves now. If we can start nearest to me here.
I'm Christine Weaver. I am the director of the Pridemore Society, so I'm representing the full community here. It's not that I'm not interested in the environment. I am. I would describe myself as a moderate environmentalist, but really what I'm trying to do is to represent the whole community here and the people who live in this space.
My name is George Monckton, and I'm an environmental activist. Some people would perhaps think my views are extreme. I would disagree with that. I think that what we need are radical approaches to the solutions that we need, and I'm here to try and explain some of those.
Hello everyone, I'm John Hughes. I'm a local hill farmer and I'm here representing the hill farmers of Pridemore more generally and their grave concerns regarding what is being brought to us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much all. And of course you will have the opportunity to add your voices to the discussion as we go through the meeting.
Freeze. Thank you. Perfect. So now, first bit of audience participation. So you'll see you've got a couple of Post-it notes on your table. If I could ask folks to each take a Post-it note, and we're going to do a little vote. This does not involve anybody coming up on stage right now, by the way, so you can relax. So as you're getting those, each person gets one vote, and I'd like you to think about, just based on the limited amount of information that you've got, we have John, who's a hill farmer, we have George, who's an environmentalist, and we have Christine, who's a local businesswoman and directs a local organization. And then we have Andrew, who is a civil servant. So based on just that, who do you anticipate you will have the most empathy with and affinity to in this scene? Just write it down. And then when you've written it down, and there's no wrong answer, and it's completely anonymous, once you've written it down, you can also draw a picture if you want, you do whatever. But once you've written it down, go ahead and just pop that Post-it note, just make a little pile of Post-its in the middle, and Irini will come and collect them. Excellent. All right. So I think with that, we're going to get back to the show.
Okay, so I would like to spend the first part of the meeting explaining our process and our plan. As you'll know, we've been undertaking a structured development phase and assessment phase of what was the best set of options and approaches for the national park. in response to that environmental issue and the struggles, the state of those SSSIs. We're coming towards the end of that 18-month period. That plan has been expert and evidence-led. We've worked with Prydeton University on extensive environmental studies. We've conducted a great amount of data gathering and fact-finding to build into our options assessment for the plans.
So much evidence collection and data. I mean, surely we actually should be doing something, don't we? Don't we know enough about these environments? Aren't we clear enough that there are major problems in the uplands? I mean, see, we talk about the uplands as if they're some sort of environmental nirvana. They're ecological deserts. They're ecological catastrophe zones that we've got to do something about.
Well,
and I have a real. We keep on having study after study. We keep on hearing scientists have got to gather more data and more information. Surely at some point we've got to actually do something, haven't we? We've got to actually do some action.
And this, we hope, is that point. We've brought together that evidence, and now we're proposing the plan.
The thing is about the university. The university does not. There are not real people in the university. You know, we people who live on the land, who've lived here all these years, we're the people who are the real stakeholders. And no one's talked to me until I was brought up on this stage today. I don't know about you.
Can I say, I've come here today, I've tried to come here in good faith, but over many, many years, I feel that these consultation processes come to these grassroots levels with their minds already made up, and the consultation is merely a palming off of local people to say that, oh, well, we did consult, and then we went ahead with the plans that we've already put in place through these cosy coteries of academics and policymakers who speak a language which is utterly alien to those of us who actually work the land. I'm sorry, it's really the
Acronyms.
There is
acronyms, but I can't follow them. I mean, I don't know about you.
It's absolute tokenism, isn't it? There's no real meaningful consultation here.
With respect, we have gone through a programme of engagement with a range of stakeholders, representatives of the different communities and stakeholders' interest, both public and statutory.
Sorry, weasel words, Andrew. I mean, I don't want to be consulted. I want to be at the decision-making table. I'm sorry. There's too many years of consultation. It's a word that's become meaningless.
I mean, we're in the midst of a climate crisis, of a biodiversity crisis. I mean, those words mean something. They're a crisis. We've got to do something now. And I just don't feel that these types of consultations really get at the urgency of the situation. I really don't think that decision makers understand what the urgency of the decisions are, of the actions that are needed.
Well, we hope that this is a forum at which we can take those views on board and help to shape our plan as we go forward.
I have a lot of sympathy with you. I'm the sort of person who occupies the middle ground. You know, I'm a moderate character, but when you present reduce grazing by 75% over the next 10 years, that's statistical. Even I understand that, and I'm no expert. And that's a statistic that I think someone like myself, I believe in commoning, I believe in mixed grazing on the common, but someone also like my friend and neighbour here, you know, John. I mean, we are the sort of people who should talk about those percentages and talk about those time periods.
I must admit, I was pleasantly surprised when I came here and I saw reduced grazing by 75% over the next 10 years. I don't think that's enough, and I think the next 10 years is too long a timescale. But actually, I was thinking, well, these are signs that things are going in the right direction. It does feel like there's starting to be an acknowledgement that actually the uplands are not the ecological panaceas that we're told about by the national parks. The national parks lie to us. You look at the website, I was looking at national parks websites yesterday, and they present these uplanded environments as if they're pristine environments where sheep farmers are living in harmony with nature. I mean, how can that possibly be accurate? I mean, sheep farming is a complete and utter travesty in the uplands. The uplands have been sheep-wrecked because of the actions of white sheep, and it's not even economic. We're told, oh yes, well, this is cultural value in the uplands. It's rubbish. The sheep farmers are not really sheep farmers at all. They're subsidy farmers. They're farming EU subsidies. We're in a situation.
All farmers are the same.
Oh, the vast majority.
I think some of you
the
hotheads,
vast
you
majority.
need to talk to real farmers on the ground and see what they're doing. I mean, farmers differ. There's commoners up here.
We just
you know.
have
I've
to
allowed George a platform here for the last however many minutes, spouting off with his usual nonsense of this narrative, which has been hatched up by a coterie of radicals whose sole aim is to scapegoat.
We just have to start to look at. We just have to start. We just one fact. We just have to start to look at the facts. A Welsh hill farmer will get an annual subsidy of something like about 50 or 60,000. An income from a Welsh hill farmer.
Excuse me, sorry.
It costs 20,000 to be able to chase.
And
Thank you for your contribution.
So, all right, this was the first scene. Now, I'd like to ask y'all, can somebody tell me kind of what's going on? Can somebody sort of summarize the situation on the stage? What's the setting? Yes. Everybody's talking, nobody's listening. Absolutely, absolutely. And what's the setting? What's the sort of scenario that we're in? It's a consultation in our Pride More site. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else we want to add to? Yes. It's fairly confrontational. Okay, great. Excellent. How realistic is this as a scene? It's not bad. It's not bad. Okay. Amazing. There's a lot of feels. Amazing. Yeah, did you want to? Yes. It's exactly what's happening. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for that validation. Now, I'm going to ask for a second time if folks could grab a Post-it note, and based on the part of the conversation that we've had so far, if you could vote and see now who do you perhaps have the most kind of empathy or sympathy with, too. We're also going to vote audibly in this room with applause. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to sort of hover my hand, everybody's seated so I can kind of reach over folks, and tell me if this is the person that you're voting for, just based on your applause. So. Ooh. Oh, interesting. And that's a relatively evenly distributed group of folks. So thank you for that. Now what I'd like us to do is we're going to do another activity, and now we're going to do what's called hot seating. So we're going to speak to these characters in a one-on-one kind of way. And so I'd like to ask, again, based on applause, who would you like to have a conversation with first? We've got the opportunity to have conversations with probably everybody, definitely 3. So who do you want to talk to first? Okay. Sorry, Tim.
You set it off.
Okay, looks like John, you have the floor. So I'm going to invite John to come over here. And now I'm realizing the microphone situation. Okay, we'll just share the microphone. But so now you have an opportunity to ask direct questions to John about anything kind of related to this or John's life kind of more broadly. Do we have any questions for him? Yes. And I'll repeat it until Irini has the mic, just so we can keep going. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Great.
Hello, John. Can you explain to us why you're so worried about the grazing being reduced by 75%, please?
Several things. There's several points to that answer, really. First of all, it feels like an attack on my livelihood and upon the culture of the moor. An attack which seems to be based upon the very vocal minority of voices who seem to get a platform amongst not only the media, but on DEFRA committees to advocate that sheep are the cause of all the woes. These emotive terms like sheep wrecking and green deserts, the whole thing is designed to antagonize the farming community and to box them into a corner. So there's that sense that we as a sector, and remember, George made the point about subsidies going to farmers. What do you imagine my earnings were in the last year as a hill farmer? You asked the question, what do you think?
5 grand.
Not far off, about 12 grand a year, that's what I make. So when you hear about subsidies going to farmers, those aren't subsidies going to farmers, those are subsidies going to consumers via the farmers to get the cheap food. Food is the economy of food is skewed towards the customer and away from the actual producer. We are boxed into a corner where we're making next to nothing for hours and hours and days after days of caring for the landscapes that not only produce your food, but give you the beauty that you come to Pridemoor for on your holidays. So I'm unconvinced equally by the scientific arguments, if there are any, for reducing grazing. I've seen how the reduction of grazing in Wales, it doesn't give you a more biodiverse ecosystem, it gives you a monoculture of tall millennia grasses that are habitat for next to nothing. So the idea that this is a panacea, a solution, is really, holds no water, but it's convenient because it gives a scapegoat to be targeted.
We've got another question in the back.
Hi, John. Thanks for coming to speak to us. I wondered if your children were to live in the national park, what do you envision they realistically will be doing in 10 years' time?
Well, obviously, I would like to think that myself and on behalf of the other farmers end up winning the argument and not being forced off the hills and forced into. I mean, we accept. You see, farmers immediately after the war, good little farmers that we are, we did what was bid of us. We produced. We put fertilizer on the land. And we accept that in doing that bidding, there has been damage to biodiversity. And all the farmers, nearly all the farmers, there's one or two who don't give a hoot, but for the most part, the farmers that I know care about the ecosystems that they farm, the animals on their farm, the bird life, and do invest in it. They don't need necessarily public money to care for that biodiversity. So I hope that we can win over the public, continue with the farming. We are motivated by our beasts. It's no point just saying, oh, well, you can't have livestock anymore. That's why we farm, because we love our flocks.
That's great. Okay, last question, and then we'll have to move on to the next speaker.
So, John, would you confirm then that if your 12,000 was locked in and you were getting some subsidies, that you would embrace more biodiversity and more diverse farming methods?
Absolutely, and I see all the farmers around me accepting the arguments around biodiversity. We don't need to be persuaded. We are not an obstruction to biodiversity net gain. We want to help, and we don't even, it's not even about getting funding to help. We will do what we can to help, and yes, if there is funding to support ventures, then we will gladly accept that.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody, but I'm going to go in order of applause. So, Andrew, I think they'd like to speak with you next. Same rules apply. You can ask Andrew directly. Do we have any questions for him? Yes, we do. Yes. Oh, well, there's a couple. Yeah. Irini, so can you raise your hands up really high so we can see? Yeah. Brill. Thank you.
Is it true that after you sent out the letters saying the 75% reduction in grazing, that 200 ponies were shot?
I'm afraid I don't have data on that. But we did send out letters as part of our consultation procedure.
Was there any safeguarding around suicide rates in rural communities when you sent them out?
No, I don't believe so, although I wasn't working on the project at that early stage.
Amazing. Other questions? I think we have one up here. Yeah, where?
No, I guess the questions were from a Daily Mail reporter.
Yeah, well, diolch yn fawr, Andrew, and John, for your answers. Do you feel it's helpful when setting up these kind of fora to bring in people as representatives of a single identity, like a farmer, let's say, and a community group, rather than seeing them as more complex than that?
So, as part of the process I've described, we've engaged with a range of different sectors and representatives from organisations and community groups, farmers' union, and so on, as part of that. At this stage in this forum, we're now inviting individuals to come and comment on the plans, which I'm trying to present. So that we can understand the full range of issues as we move into the delivery phase.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. We'll let you go back to your podium. Be safe. Now, Christine, we'd like to invite you to the hot seat. And folks, do you have any questions for Christine?
Hi, Christine. What would make this a meaningful consultation for you?
That is such a good question. I've been waiting for someone to ask me that question. I feel that what would make it meaningful would be if people thought about how we actually all love this landscape in our own way. We want to protect it, we want to make it work, and we're able to compromise and be friends. I'm also, one thing that hasn't come up so far that I don't know if it's, I'm a bit worried about the accessible landscape for all. We haven't got to that because the agenda seems to be a little bit kind of delayed, you know. But I am a bit worried about that because I have to tell you that the Airbnbs that have taken over the village and all these people tramping around with their dogs, I'm a very keen bird watcher. I've watched birds decline in this area. So it'd be meaningful for me if we really tackled these issues together as a community. And possibly if we could get rid of any of the people who aren't local, you know, not have to speak to them, that would be preferable.
Are there any other questions for Christine? Yes, one in the back.
Hello, I'm troubled when you use the word community, that you very clearly only mean human inhabitants of a place. Can you envision the word community meaning multi-species community?
Well, that's the sort of university term I don't understand. But I still resent your implication because, in fact, I am a huge lover of birds and of the ponies up on the moor. I understand more than perhaps is apparent about, you know, these debates because I've been here a long time and I understand, and talking to the local farmers, the way in which they actually do love their beasts, as John was saying. And a lot of them, you know, there's good farmers and there's bad farmers. I've always said that. You know, and these good small-scale farmers, we need to encourage them because they do love all the different, what was that funny term you used? Multi-species.
That's great. Okay, quick last question, Irene's choice, whichever one you get to first.
Okay, I need some exercise.
How worried are you about the implications of these decisions for property values in the area?
That's a very good question. I have 3 sons, big, healthy sons that love to eat a lamb roast. And I am concerned that they won't be able to stay in this community. And this is another concern of mine about all the Airbnb and all this kind of thing that's going on. I mean, I'm sometimes seen by some people as an incomer because I came here 30 years ago. But actually, you know, people like me, we will defend the community to the death. And that's what I'm prepared to do. So yes, I am worried about house prices, and I'm worried about the whole rural economy and where my children are going to work. And our children are at the same school, aren't they? You know, we have a lot in common, actually, even though I think he should pull back the sheep a bit, but let's not talk about that now. We have a lot in common, you know, we're people for whom this community matters and the culture of this community matters. You know, that's why I came here, that's what I admire, that's what I love. So yeah, good question.
Thank you very much, Christine. And last, we'll hear from George. Does anybody have any questions for George? Yes, okay, 1, 2. Thank you.
George, if everything is rewilded, where's our food going to come from?
I think that's the typical kind of question, isn't it, that you get asked in these sorts of events. At the moment, we're here talking about upland farming. These are not areas that are great for food production. And what I find completely bizarre, if we look at a country like the UK, we've got the lowlands, which are pretty ecologically crap, to be honest with you. But we look at the uplands, they're equally as bare. I mean, they're terrible. Whereas you go into Europe and you've got the lowlands, which is where they produce the food, which is, you know, obviously important. But you look at the uplands and they're much richer, they're much more biodiverse. They've actually got forest cover. I mean, this country at the moment, we've got something like, 12% forest cover in the country, whereas the average in Europe is 37%. So we have got to do something fundamentally different. And this isn't about food production versus biodiversity. This is about thinking what's appropriate in different geographical and geomorphological areas. And there should be a recognition that we are a rainforest country. The UK is a rainforest country. I did my undergraduate at the University of somewhere or other, and in environmental science, we didn't get told that we lived in a rainforest country. So I think this is a cultural issue as well as a biodiversity issue. This is how we label environments.
We've got time for one last question.
George, would it help if you told us that your day job is Chief Executive of Aviva Insurance Asset Managers? And that the known value of insured assets at risk in the UK of flooding is 4.4 trillion, and that you can't pay pensions to everyone in this room in 20 years' time unless you persuade everybody to follow what you're saying.
Oh, thank you very much. I think you clearly have me mixed up with the identity of someone else. I live in a small Welsh village, actually. It's quite a rural village. And at the end of the day, we have choices to make, don't we? We have choices to make about how we manage our landscapes. Fundamentally, what we have to do is value these landscapes. I think we've got to get away from the ecological lie about the ecological integrity of the uplands. I think they have been trashed by land uses that are actually predominated by the wealthy elite in this country, the large landowners creating spaces for their sports and hobbies. We've got grouse shooting, deer stalking. For goodness sake, this isn't about food production, and we need to take some radical actions now to try and sort that out.
Great. Thank you very much, George. And thank you all very much for your questions. Now we've got the last bit of audience engagement. And so we'd like you to vote one more time on your Post-it note. Irini's going to collect these, and then we're going to tell you tomorrow how the vote tracked. But so we'd like you to, based on now the entire thing that you've seen, who do you have, which character do you have kind of the most sympathy or empathy for? And go ahead and pop your Post-it down on the middle. And while you are doing that, I'm going to ask you to multitask. I'm going to tell you what we would do if we had more time. So if we had, say, another 30 minutes, what we would do next is actually invite members of the audience to come up and take the roles of these characters and participate. We're not going to do that today, but that's one way that we could kind of extend the piece. So with that, that's the end of our play. Please give our actors a round of applause. And I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves with their real names now. And then we'll have just a couple of minutes for questions at the end. So we'll go ahead with Ewan.
Hi, I'm Ewan Allinson. I'm a sculptor, a professional dry stone waller, so I talk with farmers often and hear their points of view. And I'm also a PhD researcher at the Duncan of Jordanson College of Art in Dundee, where I'm doing an interdisciplinary PhD on local knowledge and how to give it more weight within decision-making. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tim Acott. I'm a professor in human geography at the University of Greenwich, and my work involves researching cultural values and sense of place. Current project at the moment, I'm working with Erica on the project called Diverse Marine Values, where we're looking at different communities around the country and thinking about how these more difficult cultural values can be taken account of, and feeling that economic and a lot of the kind of quantitative methods are actually can help hide certain types of values. So how do we actually conceptualize diverse values, and how do we draw out those diverse values in practical context that might relate to policy and decision making? And obviously I've worked with as a co-I on the ALERT project with Irini over the last couple of years.
Hi, I'm Harriet Tarlow. I'm a professor of eco-poetry and poetics at Sheffield Hallam. So I've done a lot of work with John, who I have to say was co-opted into this role by me on the train yesterday. And yeah, I work on a lot of projects with artists of all kinds, mainly visual artists, a lot of community engagement, and looking at really at how the arts can work with people to change values, to talk about the ideas that matter, and particularly to work with local people in the place where they are. Some of you would have come to our poetry reading that John and I did earlier, so that's a lot of the sort of work that I do, and I use those kind of texts with people in communities. Yeah.
Yeah, my name's John Bridge. I'm an associate professor in environmental geoscience at Sheffield Hallam University. So I've been on quite a journey in the last 4 years or so, working with Harriet and other colleagues on an AHRC-funded research network as part of the Landscape Decisions Programme, Hydrospheres, looking at how arts-based collaborative co-design might be used to help inform and open up decision-making processes in the landscape.
Great. So we have time, I think, for a couple of questions, if anybody has any, right? I'm going to sort of turn it over to Tim, really, now. This is your...
Oh.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, if we've got any question right up the back, I think.
Yeah, could we actually get somebody could somebody maybe help Irini out and actually be the person on the mic so that she can come and join us? Can somebody help us out with that?
I'm okay.
Oh, okay.
I can speak from the audience.
Okay.
I have a question, but I will ask it in a moment.
Right. So our question now is how do you finish this with the community? So once you've done this and you've got to a point of like extreme conflict, how do you use it to make progress now?
Yeah, so so it's really, one thing that's I think really essential about this form is that it's actually dangerous to kind of parachute in and just do a one and done kind of a thing. So what you really need to do, because there's no kind of magic bullet, because if there were, there wouldn't be a need for this. So what you do at this point is you explore different scenarios. So we'd take some time, we'd invite members of the audience to come and play roles. Probably the Andrew role would be the one in this community that we would assume most people would want to play, but not necessarily. And then once we've tried out different kind of scenarios, we would then really have a conversation, and then it would be about stepping back and allowing the stakeholders that happen to be in the room to start to work toward a plan of action. But it's really a starter, if that makes sense. And I think that's really key, actually, to the way that we even just fund something like arts-based methods. When we think about the kind of even just a 3-year funding period and then it's ending, what do you do? What's your responsibility with those communities? So it's something about kind of trying to build in as much as possible the ability for that community to take the conversation. Does that make sense?
If maybe we've just got one more question. If anyone's got a question, yeah, Simon.
Hi there. I was absolutely astounded that there is an uncanny familiarity about this, and I think probably it's something I could probably share with a lot of people in this room. I just wondered about what your research was in coming up with this, because it's actually so good.
Well, it's actually, I think Irini, we worked as a trio about a month ago. We met, and Irini, I think, should talk about the research for the scenario, and then I'll talk about how we dramatized it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll finish that. I'm multitasking. Yeah, it was the question, how did we know all these issues, or how we thought to put it together, Simon? Was it a question about the knowledge of the issues? Was your question about how did we put together the knowledge? Or how did I have the knowledge of the issues?
No, I think I operate in a very similar environment, and in terms of landscape management, and the scenario is exactly
the idea was that you know, of course, to find a very typical situation where you will recognize, everybody will recognize, and to reveal how the tension, which at the start, it can start getting a little bit smoother as we go on with the conversation. Of course, this is what happens. But the point here is that by demonstrating that, but playing this role, and by asking people to come into the position, as Erica explained, normally would be a situation when we will exchange roles, is that you see the other points of the other's point of view. That was one of the things. The other stage, which we didn't go through, and that was my question, is then what do we suggest? How the solution comes? Can we come in agreement? Can we reach a common point, a shared understanding of the situation? And this is the tricky point. So for here, if I ask you what would be the next, how you would resolve the situation, what would you do?
I think I feel one of the stumbling blocks in these arguments, in the UK especially, it's a cultural thing, is that we're fixated on debate. And debate means winning a debate. And really what we need to move towards are conversations. And it's interesting how I had a leadership role in a landscape partnership in the north of England. And which was kind of arts-led, and the arts can create a kind of convivial space in which people who imagine they might be at odds with each other, in that arts forum, you take that tension out, and people discover that they have a lot more common ground than they realize, and that common ground is a shared love for landscapes. And you can start with where you agree, and then you establish personal relationships. So it's better to have these discussions down a pub. And there's been some interesting work by a socio-ecologist, Antonia Eastwood, around how you get fractious landscape relationships in the Cairngorms, for example, how you remove that fractiousness and actually get conversations going so that relationships become personal between people with different positions.
But we came, I mean, also, because this is completely improvised by amateurs, this thing you've seen. And when we, what do you mean, surely not? When we did it, we were actually, when we were rehearsing together, just improvising together, we did actually start to make alliances and allegiances and come a bit closer to each other, but we've only done a little, we only showed you the chaos today. And I thought that was quite interesting because we were just all improvising in character. But even then, probably because all of us have worked in these kind of contexts, we did start to make little alliances and connections and, start to kind of reach a better position. But there was one really vital thing missing, which was that we couldn't go to the pub. We couldn't bring in the tray of tea, and biscuits, because actually it's that sort of, bringing people together, not sitting like this in a row, but, sitting around together that makes things happen better.
I think if we just had a little bit longer time here, then you would have seen the evolution of that process of going from that conflictual situation into, because actually, that's one of the hardest things I found was maintaining this conflictual situation. Because actually, I think there was a lot more overlap.
At the same time, you don't want to have it kind of end with a nice bow on top. You do want to leave the conflict because it is, right?
But can I add one more point? Yes, I will give to Chris. It's also that the art, the fact that it's a functional situation, it gives the rest of the people the opportunity to take part in this, to feel empowered, that they can say something. Lots of people, they put up their hands and they ask questions that they perhaps could be intimidated in a different environment.
So to do this, you had to sort of empathize with the roles. And I'm curious whether any of you kind of found anything out about yourselves by taking on these stereotype characters. No, but do you see what I mean? Because actually, in a way, what we've heard is this is a stereotypical situation. Everybody said it represents things everybody's experienced. And I think one of the really important things that comes out of this is the process of that empathizing with somebody else. So I'm genuinely curious whether any of you kind of got closer to understanding something because of inhabiting a role like that.
I can start off an answer to that, and I would actually say yes. I think that's true. I mean, I don't consider myself a radical environmentalist at all, although sometimes I kind of find myself having sympathy with those. But actually, when I kind of inhabited that role, I was thinking, oh, but I don't quite think that. Actually, I don't have quite such a radical perspective. My own perspective is much more kind of tolerant. Is actually much closer, perhaps, to the character that Ewan was playing, and so I did. I think by inhabiting this role, start to interrogate my own feelings, my own kind of knowledge about this, which I hadn't expected. So that was interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately we don't have more time. It would be good if we could continue the conversation. But thank you very much for your participation, and we can continue the conversation outside and later for during a drink. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I will come to collect the votes.